Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast. Well, the kids are back at school this week, and for many workers in Toronto's financial district, it's also back to the office.
It feels good. You get to move out of the house, meet new people, walk around the downtown. It's always a good feeling.
I personally like it because I live very close and it makes me come outside of my place, basically.
It's nice, actually. We can show off all the dresses we've got. Come to office. It's nice. At least thrice a week is really welcoming.
I do think that there is an inherent advantage of being in the office. And I might be old school, might be from a different generation that grew up in the office versus, the younger kids these days, if you will. I do think it's a positive thing.
4 of Canada's major banks have announced that workers will be expected back in the office 4 days a week. For Ontario government workers, it's 5 days a week, and many other big employers are following suit. At lunch hour, the food courts under the office towers are hopping, but not everyone is happy to be there.
I think if there is more flexibility, it's something that my team would prefer, because we are more technical than business and we don't really meet that much clients. So a lot of my coworkers also live in very faraway cities, and that could be a problem for them. So if there is any improvement in transportation, or maybe if the housing rate is getting better, it would be very nice for them.
I'm feeling like it's not the best decision for people's work-life balance. The city grew a lot in the last 5 years since COVID started, and our infrastructure is not able to accommodate everybody being back. Yeah, it just feels like we're going back at least over a decade back in time. We have all the infrastructure to work from home. There's no need for us to be in office when we're not customer facing. Let us work from home and save the roads for people who need to commute.
A survey by Angus Reid shows close to 80% of Canadians would prefer at least some remote work. So how are employers luring them back to the office and keeping them happy? I'm joined by 2 people with insight into that. Natalie Casson is president of Casson Recruitment. She specializes in helping companies hire accountants. And Nick Kendrew is senior vice president at Colliers Toronto. It's a commercial real estate broker. They are both with me in studio, not joining us remotely. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
The real mixed bag there, Natalie, in terms of how people are responding in the food courts to being called back into the office. This is a hot topic across the country. What are you hearing from clients and from job candidates about the return to office mandates?
It's definitely a mixed bag, I would say. Most of the candidates I talk to are looking for some sort of flexibility in their work. But employers at the same time, they are mandating stricter return to work policies. So I would say, though, every time this happens, I get more emails in my inbox. So that tends to be a good thing for me, at least.
What does it mean in terms of staff turnover, do you think? I mean, a lot of people will say, I don't want to come back into the office. I'm going to find something else to do. But is that realistic? Is that actually what's unfolding right now?
I think the tough thing is that a lot of employers in the same industry are making more stricter policies at the same time. So it's not going to be necessarily very easy to find another role that is completely remote.
Because everybody's in the same boat.
Because everyone's in the same boat. That's right.
Yeah.
So I'm not seeing a ton of remote options for people anymore.
Nick, it's interesting hearing from those employees in the food court. They're under those towers that were hollowed out for the last few years during the pandemic. People were musing about turning some of those big towers possibly into housing. That seems to be over and done with. What are you hearing about how this impacts commercial real estate?
Yeah, I mean, I think really to be an office landlord for the last 5 years, it's been quite a rough period. And, from multiple sides, your leasing efforts might not be good, your rent might go down. And also a lot of lenders, banks, they don't want to lend on office buildings. So that's a tougher environment. So really the fact that most of these banks and the Ontario government have announced together, that's the news they've been waiting for. And I'd say this is probably one of the strongest turning points in my 20-year office career.
I mean, some of those clients had looked at shrinking their footprints, right? In terms of they don't need all the space because people were working from home. What happens now if people are coming back?
So we're seeing so many companies shrank their footprints during the pandemic and during the last couple of years when they thought that maybe they could keep hybrid policies going for longer. Many of those big organizations are actually proactively out there now looking to lock down some of the best possible space in the downtown Toronto area.
Really?
And so we're seeing that reflected in the vacancy rate for some of the AAA top quality assets in Toronto.
I want to come back to that in terms of which buildings are being occupied. If employees don't want to come back, Natalie, how much of a premium do companies have to pay, or do they have to pay a premium at all to get them back into the office? Are there things that they have to do, things that they can dangle in front of them?
I think for the most part, it does come down to salary. But a lot of times that's still not enough. I had a candidate last week who had multiple job offers in front of them. One was $10K more and was in office, and the other one was hybrid and a little bit closer to the office, and honestly had probably a better career trajectory for them. But they still went with the remote one, or sorry, the hybrid one.
And they were willing to take less money.
They were willing to take less money, that's right.
And is that a common thing? That people are willing to perhaps take a bit of a haircut on the salary if they don't have to commute, if they can work from home, if they have the convenience of flexibility?
Absolutely. When I'm talking to candidates on a regular basis, they seem to almost have two different salaries. So they have the salary that is for that in-office work that tends to be about, $10K or almost sometimes 10% higher. And then they have the other salary where they're willing to be a little bit more flexible if they don't have to commute.
So Nick, tell me more about the buildings here, because there's research from your company that shows that the fanciest top tier, what do you call them? AAA?
Yeah, AAA.
Office buildings. Those are the ones that are most in demand right now. What is that about?
So I think there's two factors to do with that. I think employers recognize that if they are going to ask their employees to come back to the office, that they want to provide them a very high quality work environment to be in. That these buildings will have access to a food court. They will be highly amenitized, so they might have a gym, they'll have bike storage, they'll have shower facilities, all the bells and whistles. The other thing that is coincidental, but I think it's also very important, most of those AAA bank towers are located within a 5 to 10 minute walk from Union Station.
So it's easily, for people across the country who don't know that, it's easy to get around from a commuting hub.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think employers are recognizing that the commute is probably one of the biggest barriers to getting people back in the office. So if they can reduce that burden, then they want to try and find space that will help them do that.
What about making sure that there's space, we're going to talk more about this, but space for people to actually work in the office? One of the things we're hearing is there's this idea of hot desking. You don't have a desk anymore. You have kind of a space that maybe you can claim if somebody else doesn't have it. People are showing up. All the spaces are claimed. Where are they supposed to work? How big of an issue is that?
It's an issue. And I think this goes back to, again, during the last 2 or 3 years when groups thought that maybe they could stay hybrid for a longer period, they gave back a lot of their space.
They didn't need it anymore.
Yeah.
They were paying for it and they weren't using it.
And now they're asking people to come back in again. I've heard anecdotes about, very big companies only having one desk for every 2 employees. So I'm also hearing stories about people working from the cafeteria or even a black market for hotel, desk booking, where people are finding a way to kind of pay someone under their table to just allocate a desk to them frequently.
Natalie, how much of that is a disincentive to the employees that you're talking about, the candidates? They don't want to come into the office because, to Nick's point, they don't want to work in the cafeteria.
No, absolutely. They don't want to work in the cafeteria. And I think that they also want to make sure that they're not only working at a desk, but they want to come in for true collaboration time.
What does that mean?
So I think one of the big turnoffs for candidates is when they commute all the way in and they get there and then they sit on Zoom calls. And I think that's a big red flag because they were sold, you're going to have this great collaboration. You're going to have mentors that will help you. You're going to learn more. And then, some of their team members are actually still working remotely and they sit at their desk and they're on Zoom calls.
Or they're working in the same office, but they just are separate and still looking at a screen.
Exactly.
I mean, you're sitting next to, just down the hall from somebody, but you're not actually sitting in the same room as them.
Exactly. So that tends to, I don't think they fully worked it out yet. I think that there is a lot of thought that needs to go into certain employers and how they're really going to have people come back to the office and truly be collaborative.
Nick, what's your sense? Has the pendulum swung back? I mean, is the era of hybrid or remote work, is it truly done? Or is this kind of a cyclical thing where people are trying to figure this out? Because commercial real estate isn't cheap. The decisions that people are making are costly decisions and need to be made with some intention and with the long game in play.
Definitely, real estate is not cheap. However, as a line item for any big corporation, real estate is a lot cheaper than human resources and people. So I think this is something that I don't think necessarily the big organizations that have made the announcements, I don't think they've knee-jerked into it. I think they're very serious about this. I do think that one of the things we are going to find is I think hoteling is going to retreat somewhat. The pendulum's going to swing back the other way. The other thing that we found was in 2010, the average square foot per employee was around 250 square feet per employee. That shrunk down to as little as around 150 square feet per employee a year or two ago. And when you look at a survey of some of the top workplace strategists, they actually think that that's going to start increasing a little more, that we will get more collaborative space in the office, that we can't demand that workers come back in and then give them a subpar experience once they're in the office.
Last word to you, Natalie. What do you say, particularly to younger employees, about, are there really benefits? We're going to talk more about the evidence here, but from your perspective, are there benefits for younger employees in terms of being in the office with other people?
Absolutely. The training and the mentorship that you get in office is absolutely invaluable. I'll look at specifically, I recruit accountants. So I look at, people who went through the CPA process fully remote during COVID. And at the end of the day, those accountants came out and they're not as well equipped as the ones I talked to that were pre-COVID. And that's because they sat in an office, one of the big four accounting offices, for example, and they sat beside someone who was doing the same job and they learned by osmosis. So it was quite easy just to, learn the things you didn't even know you needed to learn by sitting next to someone. And, when you're working remotely, you have to carve out time to ask your manager questions. You can't just, easily go to someone next to you and ask a question about a file that you're working on.
You wonder whether that idea sticks with a younger employee who perhaps is not as keen on coming into the office.
I would say even when I look at myself, I definitely would not be where I am today if I had not been in an office. I know Nick and I were talking about this earlier as well. We learned a lot by just, being around colleagues doing the same job. So if you're working at home and you just don't have that insight next to you, your learning curve is definitely going to be slower.
It's good to have you both in here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Natalie Casson is president of Casson Recruitment. She specializes in helping companies hire accountants. Nick Kendrew is senior vice president at Colliers Toronto, a commercial real estate broker. Bruce Daisley has held senior roles at Twitter and Google, now best-selling author on workplace culture. His newsletter is called Make Work Better. He hosts a podcast called Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat. Bruce, hello to you.
Hello there.
You will hear a lot of jargon from companies who are bringing employees back into the office. They'll talk about how this is going to build synergy, this is creating alignment, it will increase productivity. Is there evidence that shows that there is a greater value for in-person work versus remote work?
I think you hit on one of the issues that prevents this, actually. And it's often the issue that organizations have tried to make an economic saving by reducing the size of their office. And so frequently, while there might be a benefit in going in and sitting next to the same colleagues every day and building a rapport, building a connection, building a sense of cohesion, quite often our experience of work is traveling in, struggling to find anywhere to sit, finding that we don't really see anyone we know. And it's closer to college library than it is a sense of sort of being in a locker room around teammates. And I think that's the challenge. While there might be a benefit of face-to-face contact, and the evidence seems to suggest that there is some benefit of that, most of us aren't in the position that we're experiencing much of it right now.
When we went out to talk to people in the financial district, it was women who tended to be the ones most upset about having to come into the office. That's a small sample size, obviously. But is there a gendered component to this in terms of who would feel that they're being squeezed more by having to come in?
Yeah, most definitely. We, while we might be reluctant to admit it, domestic responsibilities still fall disproportionately on women. What we see is that when people travel into the office, effectively they're losing about an hour and 10 minutes a day in terms of the additional travel time. And what that tends to do is it just tends to turn the screw on our domestic pressures. That extra time means that we then are sort of playing catch up. We've got food to cook or food to buy and care responsibilities. 1 in 10 of us have a responsibility towards parents, let alone children or pets. And so, yeah, absolutely. The travel to work often finds workers feeling that it's not necessarily something that yields a benefit to them. They feel that they can do their job as effectively at home. But it's the additional pressures that commuting causes that often make our lives just that degree more stressful.
Do we know whether they're able to do their job as effectively at home, though? This is the reason why employers want to bring people in. There is a myth, belief, whatever you want to call it, that those who are working from home are not working as hard as those who might be in the office under the eyes of the boss.
That's right. The Economist did a pretty rigorous analysis on this last year, and they said that broadly productivity was give or take about the same. They said productivity at home was about 2 or 3% lower than productivity at work, but broadly the same. But they said that the happiness that working from home produces, that sort of reduction in the stress, the reduction in the burnout, was worth the benefit of it. So I think broadly it's a toss-up, which is more productive. We might say that there is some benefit, some additive benefit of feeling a sense of connectedness with our colleagues. Whether you need to do that 5 days a week, I think is pretty moot. But the challenge is that most organisations aren't necessarily optimising for that. Time in the office doesn't necessarily look particularly different to time at home. We're not dialing up face-to-face connection. We're not having lunch with colleagues. And so it's why the majority of workers are feeling like flexibility is something that they would, as we've heard before, they would opt to take less pay to have more flexibility because it's got such a perceived benefit for them.
Can you just talk briefly about that piece that Natalie mentioned, and particularly for younger workers? There's this idea that culture exists in between things. That creativity may not be in those meetings, whether they're on Zoom or in person, but it's the moments in between when you can lean over a desk and talk to somebody, you run into somebody, and something happens. Is that a real thing?
Culture living in the gaps between things is probably one of the clearest understandings we've got about teamwork and team bonding. And we see really lovely evidence on this. Workers who are able to have lunch together or have a coffee break together tend to have greater trust for each other. They tend to have a stronger sense of emotional connection. So that's most definitely true. The question we might have is, are there many gaps left between things now? One of the biggest changes to work in the last 10 years hasn't necessarily been the question of where we do our work, but more what work looks like. And the amount of time we spend in meetings has trebled in the last 6 years. That, I think, has a bigger impact on the experience of work. For a lot of us, we find ourselves going from one meeting, whether it's a virtual meeting on Teams or whether it's an in-person meeting, we go from one meeting to another. And it's created this sense that work is very crushed, it's very condensed, it's very intense. Work intensification is one of the things that we've definitely observed in the data. And it just has the overall experience of making work feel a little less personalised, a little less human. So I would say that that's one of the bigger issues that we need to resolve, how we reduce this meeting inflation, reduce the amount of time we're spending just sitting in meetings with each other.
Meeting inflation. I have to let you go, but just in a word or two, do you think these return to office mandates are going to stick?
Yeah, broadly, the evidence seems to suggest that organisations that are demanding work return to office, they tend to grow more slowly. They tend to have problems retaining their best employees. So I think it is quite a regressive act. Probably we have to accept that the future of work probably doesn't look like returning to 2019. We need to do something a bit more imaginative.
Bruce, good to speak with you. Thank you very much. Bruce Daisley is a best-selling author, host of the podcast Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, also publishes a newsletter called Make Work Better. You've been listening to The Current Podcast. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.